This podcast is a collaboration between Costard and Touchstone Productions and the Dads from the Crypt podcast.
I wish I could give you some of the things you need.
You wouldn't be trying to lead me astray, would you? You know, the nice thing about buying food for a man is that you don't have to laugh at his jokes. Just think, if you were some big shot like a casting director or something, I'd be staring into your bridge work saying, "Yes, Mr. Smearcase. No, Mr. Smearcase. Not really, Mr. Smearcase. Oh, Mr. Smearcase, that's my knee."
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the How Not to Make a Movie podcast. I'm Alan Katz.
And I'm Gil Adler.
Before we get going, we just want to remind you, if you are enjoying what we are doing, please like and, like it says behind me, subscribe. Today's our guest is a journalist and a film aficionado of the first rate named KRISTEN Lopez. She just joined The Wrap as film editor in 2022. She's been a pop cultural essayist, a critic, and an editor whose articles have appeared at Variety, MTV, Turner Classic Movies, and on the Roger Ebert website. She was previously TV editor for IndieWire, where she was nominated for a SoCal Journalism Award and a National Journalism Award by the LA Press Club. She's also the author of a book called But Have You Read the Book? 52 Literary Gems That Inspired Our Favorite Films. Grew up a movie lover, and she's living her dream life. Here's KRISTEN. First up, a question KRISTEN had asked me a few days before. Why doesn't Tales from the Crypt stream? You have far more knowledge of the stuff in the back room than I did, because you had a far deeper relationship with Joel and a far deeper relationship with the Gaines, Bill and the Gaines family. Yeah. And so if you still had any outstanding questions, KRISTEN, I thought before we start in with the new business, we'll finish with the old business, because really and truly, Gil can answer your question better than I could.
Maybe.
I mean, so my theory, so there's a lot of, I go down this rabbit hole every Halloween, and I've read like every piece of legalese there is to read in this whole thing. And my whole thing is I talked to a copyright attorney about the lawsuit that Gaines had with Joel Silver, and his whole thing was that the lawsuit only pertains to any new attempts to bring Crypt to TV or film. It doesn't extend to the old series. The old series could still stream. The lawsuit has no bearing on it. So my theory is that essentially at this point, the reason it's not streaming is, and I talked to HBO and they kind of said what I'm thinking, which is that it would require the living participants of Tales Holdings to sit down and agree to a deal with HBO and like all of that. Supposedly that's the holdup. And I asked Alan, I was like, do you think that would ever happen, that like Silver and Walter Hill and
Bob
would sit down and hash out something? And he was like, no. But I think that's the holdup. I don't know if you agree or disagree with that.
It is and it isn't. Part of the holdup is, first of all, you can see it for free on YouTube.
Very true. Yes.
So nobody is interested in streaming it because it's already on YouTube for free. That's number one. Number two, I haven't spoken to the partners for many years, but my recollection of their interest is always to make money. And if they thought they could make money, they'd be interested in anything. They're not interested in Tales from the Crypt in the old episodes because they are for free and feel who's going to pay money when they can get it for free. With the new ones, they can't do new ones because the estate can't get a relationship. Yeah. You know, they hate each other, or at least the estate hated Joel and came to me and said, we want to do it with you because you had a great relationship with our dad and he always loved you and Alan. Would you guys do it? And so we were interested in doing that. We pretty much had a relationship with the estate. They were very excited about doing it. And then Joel got involved and put a kibosh on it because two things. The estate didn't really understand or know where their rights began and ended, and they had terrible attorneys. And B, Joel was basically saying, no, I'm not going to let you do it. And even if you have the rights to go back to the comic books and recreate them with either Gil and Alan or somebody else, I own the Crypt Keeper, the one that was in the TV series. You own the Crypt Keeper and the Vault Keeper that was in the comics, but you don't own the specific puppet. And that brought us down into the rabbit hole, and then everything sort of fell apart. At one point, TNT made a deal with M. Night.
Yeah, I remember that.
And they didn't own the rights, and they spent a fortune of money and lost it all because they finally realized. I think I may have told them, you guys don't have the rights, and they said, oh yeah, we do. And I go, I'm telling you, I know you don't. So. And of course, they went down the peak with that, and it wound up doing nothing except losing them a lot of money.
I keep saying Moonlighting got remastered and put out by Hulu. People thought that could never happen. So right. I maintain, I never say never, but it's so. I mean, because the YouTube ones are fine. They're great. I mean, they're great in a pinch, but they're not remastered. It's still. It would be great to have somebody that lovingly wanted to restore them, and do proper bonus features and stuff because I was telling Alan, my box set is gold. If there's a fire, that's what I'm saving first, because you can't find those at all. They're they're treasure at this point. So it's very frustrating. But yeah.
It was frustrating for me and for Alan too. When the estate came to us and said, we want you guys to do it, for me, that was oh my God, we would be able to do it without anybody else interfering. And we could go further than we did, and we could have fun with it. And
anybody else being Joel.
Right. And
that's code.
Anyway.
Yeah.
All right. So I hope that expanded a little bit more onto your theory. Yeah. It gave it. I wanted to give you the fullest possible answer we could on your very good question.
Yes.
You've got this passion for film. Good God, you've got this passion for film. It is the reason, number one, why as soon as we were talking and I went and I saw your podcast and listened to you talk about movies and the way that you talk about them.
My problem is that this is an hour 45-minute movie, which is about the same amount of time as the Philadelphia Story, and yet this feels longer. You have to get songs in for Bing. You got to get songs in for Frank. You got to get a song in for Grace. I didn't even know Grace Kelly could sing until I saw this movie. It just always feels like these are not actors in an ensemble, but three big monster A-list actors jockeying for time. I can just kind of see them elbowing each other metaphorically behind the scenes. This is the Ocean's 11 of the 1950s.
I felt like we were kindred spirits, and for that alone, we just had to have a conversation about just talking about movies and the passion that we both feel about this particular art form. You came from the Sacramento area.
Yeah.
Movies were an early passion, I'm guessing.
My parents were definitely more permissive, probably, than they should have been. Their explanation is that you knew fact from fiction fairly early on. You knew movies weren't real, so we just kind of let you watch whatever. I remember the two movies that were not allowed for me to see, and I tell my mom this all the time, is you were against Pulp Fiction and Chasing Amy. It's which I'm not really clear on why that was the line in the sand when you let me see R-rated other R-rated films. She was I don't know, I just was winging it. I was the first in my family, so I saw American Beauty at 8, but Pulp Fiction was a bridge too far. Go figure that one. I always was into films. The Wizard of Oz was one of my first classic movies. I watched a lot of Disney stuff as a kid.
That's now, do you remember the first movie you saw where suddenly ding 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 something about it just
it's nerdy and nobody remembers it but me. But in 7th grade, we did a series on like Tudor England, and my teacher, who was older, showed us 1969's Anne of the Thousand Days, which nobody remembered.
Well, there's no trace of medicine or fever on these sweet lips.
Richard Burton, Geneviève Bujold.
Geneviève
playing
Bujold,
Henry
yeah.
VIII. Yeah,
Oh gosh, yes. I
and-
can see Geneviève right now in my head.
and I was just like in love with this movie. I was like, this is amazing. The sets, it was a story I was interested in. Like, I was just like, and I also read a lot. Like, I read a lot of like Hollywood insider stories, you know, and I read a lot of biographies about people. So I was always really interested, weirdly enough, in like the business of Hollywood. I remember reading High Concept like as a teenager, which is the story of Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer. And I was like, God, this is so cool. Hollywood's so cool. It's like sex, drugs, and ideas, you know. And so I was really into it. Once I got to high school, I was very fascinated with like films made that were earlier than me. I wrote reviews for my high school paper, which none of my peers read, but my teachers loved, because they were like, you're watching Woody Allen's new movie and you're watching all this stuff. My peer group was not going to see Match Point, but my teachers were like, well, Kristen knows what movies to go see. And it was a thing I always thought would be a hobby. Never thought I'd get a job where like it would pay the bills and be something I could do. But yeah, movies have always been like a huge part of who I am.
I was going to ask you about, you know, those pinch me moments. I get the feeling you experience quite a few pinch me moments where you suddenly think, God, I'm getting paid to do this shit. This is what I'm doing for a living. Holy
exactly.
Shit.
I mean, my job started where I was like, if I can just see movies for free, you know, like I'll be okay. Like that'll be the high point, because you know movies are expensive. So that was like the start. And then as
popcorn is expensive. Holy shit.
Exactly. Gas, like, yeah, the whole thing, the logistics of going to the theater. And so since that, like my first interview that I ever got, I wrote a really small article about Sofia Coppola making The Beguiled. And I talked about how much I loved the original movie, why I thought she would be a good fit for the remake. And I got a message from her publicist that was like, we really think you understand Sofia. Do you want to come out and interview her? And I was like, is this fake? This sounds like some sort of trafficking thing where like I show up and then you throw me in the back of a van or something. And no, it was not. I flew out to LA. I got to have lunch with her at the Beverly Hills Hotel, which was like a whole other level of like money and wealth that I'm still not used to.
When you say flew out to LA, you mean flew down to LA?
Yeah, well,
Weren't you in Sacramento?
Sacramento, it's like a 90-minute flight.
Yeah, I know, but that's not flying out to LA. That's what people on the East Coast do. You don't get to say you flew out to LA.
I'm still gonna say it. I'm still doing it. But it was amazing. Like, and you know, I've gotten to talk to like people that I love and admire and respect. You know, they always say never meet your heroes. And that's true. I've seen certain people in like, you know, situations where they're not on and it's been like disappointing. But, you know, at the end of the day, like I go back home.
Who disappointed you?
I don't want to say anybody because
I'll show you my Dennis Miller broke my heart.
Oh, I've met him. He was at a classic.
I'm making a joke. He didn't break my heart. I hated him the minute I met him.
I did meet him very briefly at a film festival, and thankfully we were talking about the movie Them. So it wasn't like I was like, as long as we don't talk about like politics or anything else, I'm like, we can have this like 10-second interaction. I'm trying to think of like people that disappointed me. I always feel like comedians, you know, that brings up a good point. Like comedians you're always expecting them to be like your best friend, you know, and it doesn't always happen.
There's a reason that they're comedians. They are the most unhappy people on the planet.
Yeah. And so I've definitely had a couple people where like my mom has been like, they're funny in real life, right? And I'm like, no, didn't work out that way. So yeah. And that's the funny thing now. Like I used to, if people look at my Twitter back in the day, which thankfully I've deleted a lot of my tweets, you know, they're like, I have friends that like come up to me, they're like, I miss it when you were thirst tweeting about how much you loved this actor. And I'm like, I can't do that anymore because the odds of me meeting them at this point is very high, and it's just going to be weird for all involved.
My question was it was not a fair question because you are now a journalist, and really truly you can't actually answer my question. I wasn't being fair, and I withdraw the question. Never mind.
Totally fine. Yeah.
And I bullshitted you anyway because I threw down Dennis Miller like I ever gave a shit.
I always tell
Miller.
people, if you meet me in the wild and like buy French fries or something, I will spill my guts. So yeah, I'm easily purchased.
You are currently the film editor at The Wrap. Now, The Wrap when did The Wrap start up?
I probably should know more about my workplace than I do. I think we're entering like our 14th year. Like we've been around for a while. So yeah.
It's a great site. I'm now subscribed.
Oh, yay. Oh my God.
This is all your fault.
I keep saying there should be like a referral box, and we should, get paid by referrals, because I feel like I've referred a lot of people over my 10 months working there.
No, you absolutely. I really was not that aware of it. You turned me on to it. So hey, The Wrap, if you're listening, you not only do you have a fine writer and journalist working for you, you have the ultimate cheerleader. Wow,
I try.
A salesperson. She does more than try. You've done some great stuff while you're there. Recently you wrote about, is it time to retire the NC-17?
Yeah,
I wasn't even aware that was still a thing.
That's part of why I think it's time to retire it. We joke about me being the resident smut reporter for The Wrap, because I think in the last 10 months I've written about the NC-17 and nudity and sex scenes in film. So I wear that with pride. And I think the NC-17 is definitely one of those that, if on the surface, it's got all these issues with it being, maybe homophobic, with it being sexist, but also it's just never used enough. I think there's 4 in the last 5 years that have actually utilized it. So it's a dead rating to me, I think, so if anything, it might be, there's been a desire to rehaul the MPAA rating system and make it more modern. I think that would be far easier.
Probably dig up Will Hayes and ask his opinion.
Exactly. I think it's an unnecessary rating at this point. It's just there for shock value.
You also wrote about Jonathan Majors and Ezra Miller and what's a studio to do when misconduct charges flare. And really your approach was from, God, what do you do when a franchise is built around the names and faces of your talent, and oh my God, they've gone and taken a huge dump on the franchise itself in a way.
Yeah, and it's amazing because this is a problem that's fairly new, right? We don't, back in the days, if I was, part of it, you didn't have actors signing away a decade of their life in advance, and that's a huge thing where, how do you expect people to be, saints, and never get in trouble for a decade, of their life, so that they're not screwing up a studio's multiple franchises, TV shows, merchandise, all these things. So it was really interesting to look at how actors are brands these days, and what happens when a brand goes bad, which just makes us sound like grist for the AI machine. But
when a brand is co-branded with a larger brand, it dings the larger brand. It can have a huge effect.
Yeah.
I must say, however, that Tales from the Crypt was on for about in HBO for about 9 or 10 years, and we never had any issues with the Crypt Keeper. He never had any outside affairs.
Yep.
Nothing, no smut. We got nothing on him.
You wouldn't be caught on video saying anything off color or anything like that. So yeah, I mean, he sets the example for everybody, in my opinion.
I think if actors today could be more like the Crypt Keeper, we'd all be better off.
Yes.
If you could go back and be Hedda Hopper or someone, would you be Hedda Hopper? Who would you want to be if you could go back?
Hedda and Luella. I mean, Hedda was kind of a racist. So
Yeah.
I would
Oh,
hope.
all right. If you strip that, all right. Yes, they were who they were in the time that they were. But if we simply look at a powerful woman with a powerful voice.
Hedda and Luella are interesting because they had such influence and such power in a time when women often didn't have that, and people took gossip seriously. I mean, they had definite influence.
Unlike now.
Yeah, I mean, nowadays, it's hard to get people. I mean, people know the trades, but you're hard pressed to find specific names that that work at those trades. Like an Ebert or a Pauline Kael. Like those days are slowly disappearing, if not completely gone.
Even a Rona Barrett.
Yeah, exactly. I interviewed Rona Barrett very briefly because she had Veronica Lake stories, and
Yeah.
I needed to get them before, because that's the sad thing. That's something that we do with our podcast is we have a list of like people that are still around, and every time I have to cross a name off the list, it breaks my heart a bit more. But no, and that's I think the interesting thing, when looking at like trade press of the 30s, 40s, 50s, actors are they're their own curators at this point of their lives, like social media and all of that. They see what they want to see, want you to see. Whereas back in the day, the collaboration between stars and the fan magazines and the press was far more fluid and permeable than I think it is now, which is just really interesting. And I love reading it, because you could have like press would just go to these people's houses and hang out, and they would tell them stuff, that they were like, you're not going to print it, so I'm just going to tell you this, and I love that, because now everything is so polished, so curated, it's so transactional. Nowadays, it was transactional then, but it was different. It's the whole thing.
At least he was pretending not to be transactional.
Exactly. Yes. Like
it was doing a dance.
Yes, they felt part of the club.
You could say it never happened. I mean, those days you could say, no, I didn't say that.
Yeah.
Even though you said it. Whereas today they have the evidence in 5 different tapings or video or whatever.
It's one of the things now that's really amazing to do. My co-host on the podcast and I come at this from different angles. I look at old Hollywood warts and all, I'm like, it's ridiculous not to. My co-host is very much like, unless it was verified with like actual facts, she doesn't like to bring it up. So like we go back and forth about stuff that I'm like, but we know, everybody knows this. And she's like, yeah, but it was never proven. I'm like, Errol Flynn dated children. We kind of know this. This is verifiable. This isn't just like a fun little rumor.
Did he actually date them? I mean, he actually took them out and bought them dinner?
Oh,
first?
yeah, and married them. Wife number 2 was a literal child. But
how old was wife number 2?
Nora Eddington was, I think when they met, she was 16, 17. My favorite fun fact was that she was a judge's daughter. I don't know if she was the judge's daughter, but she was a judge's daughter who was selling concessions at the courtroom or at the courthouse where Flynn was on trial for statutory rape. So, the places you meet people, that's a Tinder slogan right there, as far as I'm concerned.
You can't write that shit and get away with it.
I mean, and that's the thing, the classic film community is very protective, and I get it. It's very easy now, there are biographers that write books, it's not like these people are alive to defend themselves, so I understand that. But at the same time, I'm like, to ignore some of these elements, whether proven or unproven, is to possibly ignore part of this person's life. Like when I talk about like who might have been gay in old Hollywood times, people get very defensive because they're like, well, we don't know. I'm like, yes, but also we don't know because people wouldn't have accepted that at that time, so let's talk about it. It's not like Cary Grant's going to get mad at me if I say it, but it might have been part of who he was. We don't know, but it's interesting to think about and discuss how that would have been perceived and responded to.
To know this about them, it opens up a piece of who they really are. you know, the art that they create doesn't fall from nowhere. It comes, the prism inside of them that is them, and that is a huge piece of the prism that is them.
And it's, I think why people love old Hollywood is that element of there was protection, but at the same time, a lot of their personality traits became text in their movies. To go back to Errol Flynn, you know, what I love is that while he was on trial for, you know, statutory rape, he made a movie. I mean, he kept working. It didn't affect his work. And he made, I think his first movie back was actually a romantic drama called Never Say Goodbye, which is a lot of fun, but it's very much selling Errol Flynn as this family man with a young daughter. And then you watch it and there's like weird little moments that if the audience at the time, I would love to know how they had responded, you know, where his daughter, who's like 8 years old, that she gets a present one day and somebody's all, well, who gave you that present? She's like, well, that Robin Hood, you know, and it's like this fun little like, oh, daddy-daughter relationship. But if you were aware of the context, it plays really creepy, you know, nowadays. I don't know how it played in 46, but I love that. I love that studios were like, listen, we can pivot this, put him in a movie, we add all these little things. It's and his career was fine. I mean, Robert Mitchum got busted for smoking pot with two women and made a Christmas romance or at the same time. I mean, I love stories like that because I don't think we have the gumption in Hollywood. I mean, people try. I mean, we get a lot of comeback stories, but I feel like a lot of Hollywood stories like this, you know, they're playing on the notoriety in a way that's very different today.
Yeah, it's notoriety comes from a much darker place now.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
A much darker place, and hell, at least some of the worst habits are finally getting called out. We're starting to.
Yeah.
To a degree, you know, entertainment journalism, it enabled a lot of that terrible behavior up through the, you know, there was that gentleman's agreement to to keep certain things, that kind of thing in particular.
Well, it's amazing too. I mean, because it extends to it extended to so much in the past. You know, like one of the things I always find interesting, you know, is you know, the blacklist. Most people know, you know, the basics of the Hollywood blacklist, but you know, you find out that like the studios kind of consorted in a lot of ways along with the government during HUAC, you know, and one of the stories that always makes my blood boil is, you know, at a certain point, there was a conversation where they were like, well, we have to offer up an actor, we have to offer up a performer, you know, who has communist ties. And they said it was between John Garfield, who I love him so much, and Danny Kaye. And they decided John Garfield was expendable and Danny Kaye was not. And every time I see a Danny Kaye movie, I'm like, you guy, I hate you so much. You know, it
wasn't Danny's fault.
I mean, it wasn't Danny's fault, but also wasn't it? I don't know. I would love to know at the time. Like, I would love to know if he would fly on that wall. But I mean, that's the thing is like the studios. I mean, movies had such influence.
What an amazing conversation that had to have been as they decided between the two.
Exactly. Well, I mean, I think I have a lot of theories about this. None of them are verifiable. You know, but Danny Kaye, you know, definitely had less of a connection to his Jewish, you know, the fact that they were both Jewish performers, you know, that he didn't look ethnic, you know, he was a ginger, you know, comedy guy. Whereas John Garfield, you know, that was an anglicized name. He was very proud of his ethnicity, you know, and he wasn't even associated with communism. His wife was associated with communism, you know, and the fact that he didn't want to play ball, he just told everybody to go fuck themselves, and that probably didn't help either. So, you know, it's very upsetting as somebody who loves John Garfield. I'm like, the movies we could have had, people. Thank you, HUAC. Thanks, communism. Some of the actors that I love are people that have such gaps in their lives, that are frustrating for me as a journalist, where I'm like, I want to know. I want to know what happened, and I'll never know.
Well, like
And
for
that
instance, someone
pisses
with a
me off.
gap in their life, who would that be?
I mean, I'm a big Veronica Lake fan. I've researched her just off and on as a hobby for several years. And I've talked to a lot of people, that knew her. She, went through their lives, and there's so many elements of her life that are just hard to verify. So many people are gone now. That always makes me
What in particular fascinates you about Veronica Lake?
she was the 40s. She cemented the 40s, the peekaboo bang. She was a huge part of cementing this concept of film noir. And then by the 50s, she just was making really shitty, obscure comedies, many of which have never been released on any type of physical media. So you don't really get to know whether she was a good actress and other things. She loved comedy. I remember a couple years ago when they found her ashes, which none of us think they were her ashes, but a portion of human remains were supposedly found in a pawn shop, and that they were supposedly hers. And I think that I gravitate to the people that have really sad stories. And I think that that's a like, how does a woman who defined the 1940s, she was labeled difficult, a lot of men said they hated working with her. That always intrigues me, is like, from what I've read, she didn't want to be a mother. She didn't really know how to parent her children. So she didn't spend a lot of time with her children. So I think the messiness is what fascinates me, and the fact that, like, if I'm interested in her, then maybe she won't fade into obscurity. I have a huge Harrell picture of her in my living room. So I'm like, she's represented, she might have been a crappy person, but like, I understand the whys, I'd like to think.
That makes her so much more interesting as a character right off the bat. Come on, Goody Two Shoes that is not an interesting character to write about or play. Well, hey, that's why we had such success getting the actors we got to do Tales from the Crypt, because they got a chance to play characters no one was going to cast them to play.
Right?
They got a chance to play shitheads and rat bastards and murdering sons of bitches. That was the whole.
We told them they could all play. They could all play Veronica Lake.
Exactly. And I mean, that's the interesting thing. Like, anytime you see something that's set in the 40s, you get the Veronica Lake references, but most people would be hell pressed to know where those references come from, which I think is always frustrating. I remember seeing LA Confidential for the first time, and my biggest takeaway was like, Kim Basinger is great, but she's too big to be Veronica. Like, Veronica Lake was 4'11", she was a very small, petite, big busted woman, that had just, that's my big thing. I'm like, she doesn't have what made Veronica Lake so interesting was
I did not know that Veronica Lake was 4'11".
Yeah, she was. Well, that's why she was paired with Alan Ladd, because Alan Ladd was like 5'1", and she was shorter than him. She was the only woman on the lot that was actually shorter than he was. And I think as a short girl, like, that's another thing I love, is like, she was a shorty and like came in and
short. Yeah, extremely short. Hey, man, I feel her pain.
Don't
how many episodes of your podcast of Ticklish Business have you? I guess, how much business have you tickled is maybe how I should ask.
Oh my gosh, I know we're over 100 at this point. I think we just put out episode 168.
Well over 100.
Yeah. So
you've been doing this now for a couple of years.
5 years, 5 or 6, I think. Yeah. I mean, the first year I don't really count, just because it was a lot of like stop and start, where I was like, how many of these am I going to do at one time? So yeah, it's been a while.
Gil and I, we sit at your feet, and we are, as relative to you newbies in this business, this is just, we're into our second year. We are amazed at your longevity, and just the consistency of your product. It's a wonderful podcast. It really is. It's so much fun to listen to because it's, well, first of all, the points of view are somewhat dissimilar, and sometimes it's so much fun to listen to the disagreements.
Yeah. I think our high society episode was probably the most disagreeable, and it's always a thing where I'm like, I don't want to get too much into the like, I hate this, so that I'm like, I always preface it like, okay, I don't like this movie, but we're all gonna stay friends after this, even though I'm shitting on something that you love. So I mean, and there are movies where I think we did an episode. I did it with a different guest, I think at the time, on like An American in Paris, which is another movie I don't like. And I mean, that's the thing that I keep reminding people of, like, the reason why we love these movies is not everybody loves them, like, are they overrated? Are they, Gone with the Wind is like often considered one of the most divisive classic films. And I'm like, so it's always good to have somebody that loves something, somebody that doesn't love something, somebody that's completely new to it. We take all opinions because I think the belief that any movie that's old is automatically fantastic is something that doesn't yield good conversation. I think that, you need to have the nuance of being like, is it good though? Is it?
If Casablanca can't stand the deconstruction, then maybe it's not the movie we think it is.
Exactly. And
but it can, and it does, and that's why it's magnificent.
Exactly. And I mean, I still have huge blind spots that I have not seen. I think I saw Citizen Kane for the first time like maybe 5 or so years ago. So what
did you think of Citizen Kane?
I think the problem is I've seen so many things that are referencing Citizen Kane that it kind of took the magic out of seeing it for the first time.
Oh, that's too bad.
But Orson Welles is fantastic.
Did you see it on a small screen or a large screen?
Small screen.
That also makes a difference.
That also, yeah. And that's
the first time I saw it was in college. I went to Vassar, and on the big screen, and it blows your mind because the camera work is so wow.
Yeah. And I think that's an amazing, like, I go to the TCM Classic Film Festival every year, and just getting to see some of these films on, like, I saw The Way We Were for the first time ever on a big screen. And I don't know how I would have felt about The Way We Were had I seen it, on TV. But I think that every,
would have felt small. It would have felt a lot smaller. It would have felt like a melodrama, like a soap opera.
And it's why I love, one of many reasons I love being in LA is like all the rep houses, that you can see old films on, so I get to come at it just something new all the time, even if it's something I've seen a million times.
And I find that I'm attracted to material where there's an emotional arc for the character or characters. So, when I think about, like A Beautiful Life, or I think about Schindler's List, not because they're about Jews or about the Nazis or about the war, but they're about an arc of characters that I can get interested in. And the same token, one of my favorite movies is Dr. Zhivago.
Yeah.
And Dr. Zhivago was the same thing. When I think about it, it's because of those relationships and those and what they meant to each other and what they're feeling. And so when I finish the movie, I'm feeling something. And when I don't feel something, I sort of feel like, why did I waste my time? One of my favorite movies, for example, on the other side of the coin is E.T. I felt something for that character. When he takes off in that spaceship, I was that little kid thinking.
E.T. Well, yeah. Everyone becomes Elliot.
Yeah.
Yes, and when E.T. reaches out and he says, Elliot, he's really touching the audience. Well, but, Spielberg is he hit the ground, a genius filmmaker. He just understood the language of the cinema in such a way it didn't have to be explained to him, by some producer who, like you. we on Tales from the Crypt, we were boot camp to a lot of first-time directors, and so we'd have to explain, here's why you would do a shot like that. And anyway, you are an advocate. You are a disability advocate. You have said, I call everyone else temporarily abled.
I mean, it's a fact.
Oh, I do not disagree. My dad had polio. And so I grew up in a house where I don't know. I never thought of my dad as disabled. He was a surgeon, and he had a whole professional life. Ultimately, doing surgery, balancing on one leg, ultimately destroyed his good leg, and it did that did not end well. But still, yeah, the world is not the same. It's not. We haven't built it fairly.
No, not at all. And that's a thing that I don't take lightly with the job that I have, because, entertainment journalism, it's not a disabled, medium. So when people call me a disabled advocate, I get weird about it, because I'm like, I'm not marching on Congress, I'm not like changing laws, but at the same time, as somebody that remembers being a teenager trying to think of like, what do I want to do with my life? Kind of telling myself, well, you can't do this because, nobody's disabled, that, like, you can't be a doctor. Like, how are you going to doctor? And that was a very, real thing for me, and I know my parents worried about it. I'm the only disabled person in my family. And so writing was something where I was like, well, I can write from home if I really need to.
Can I ask about your
Sure.
disability? Is it type 1 osteogenesis imperfecta? Is that what you have?
It's like type 3,
Type 3, okay.
so yeah. And I'm a full-time wheelchair user. Got to experience a lot of fun medical stuff, and by fun I mean really not fun. Medical stuff as a kid, a lot of surgeries.
For people unfamiliar with what that is, what are the implications of your condition?
So I always tell people, because movies are always a gateway to learning about others. If you've seen Unbreakable and you remember Samuel L. Jackson's character, it's the same disease, which I know that because when Unbreakable came out, I had a lot of people that came to me and said, have you seen this movie? It'll speak to you because Samuel L. Jackson has the same thing. You have Samuel L. Jackson disease. I'm like, I don't think we should say that ever. So it's brittle bone disorder. It's something that really affected me as a kid. I would be doing something seemingly innocuous, and I would end up like fracturing a hip, or so spent a lot of time in having surgery, spent a lot of time in like half body casts, doing a lot of medical procedures that now, thankfully, thanks to medical science, they no longer do. So it was a process, and thankfully, once you mature into adulthood, stuff tends to calm down, so nowadays if I face plant on my front lawn in my wheelchair, I just like maybe like ding myself. I've become like really resilient, as an adult, which is weird.
Does that actually happen?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Like 3 years ago it happened. And it was not fun, but I walked away from it with like, they're like, you just have a slight like fractured ankle. I'm like, well, I'm feeling good. So as long as we're like, just give me like a bandage or something, I can get out of here. So it's very bizarre how indestructible I've seemingly become.
You've said that it's fascinating to remember that the movie with the most disabled people on screen remains 1932's horror feature Freaks.
Yeah.
And you point out that though it is sold as a feature to scare able-bodied audiences, to many disabled viewers, it's a sensitive and audacious examination of disabled exploitation, and it came out in the 1930s, no less. It's a terrific movie. It's an amazing movie. It's haunting simply for its honesty.
Yeah, and I mean, Freaks really is a groundbreaking movie in so many ways, and it's fascinating that there's as many people in the disabled community who love it as who hate it. When I see both sides, I definitely respect people that do feel it is exploitative, because it was crafted by a studio that saw these people as a source of exploitation. But I think what always strikes me, especially as somebody that grew up watching a lot of movies and learning about disability through movies, because I didn't have anybody in my family that I could go to like talk about like how do I handle this as a disabled person? I was winging it as I went along. And movies taught me a lot of really shitty things about, this is what you're going to experience in your life. And Freaks, I think a lot of the reason why people turned against it at the time, and I still think why a lot of people turn against it now, is that these are disabled people that can't pass for able-bodied. They can't hide their physical differences. They're not aesthetically pretty, and that's a huge thing that we do need to, one of many things we need to see more of in film, is disabled people who look disabled. Because if, you're only seeing like a hot chick who's, 5'6", sitting in a wheelchair, and, oh, she's got, like guys don't want to date her. And I'm like, you look hot. Okay. You can get up out of that wheelchair. There's no physical difference, that I'm seeing. What does that tell somebody like me who does have physical differences, is like, oh, enjoy feeding your 7 cats and living alone for the rest of your life. Not that I'm against that, but I worry about the, young disabled kids that grow up today. Gen Z is so aware and they're so progressive, but I worry about disabled kids who do watch movies and they're like, well, shit, it's 2023. I'm still not seeing anybody that looks like me. What does that mean for, my value in society? So, that's one of many things that keeps me up at night.
Yeah, the more that our stories reflect the audience that watches them, there's nothing wrong with that. I think the audience will not turn away from that. Our story should look like, well, if they're taking place in the world we all live in, it should feature the people.
Yeah. And I mean,
we all live in.
Yeah, it's fascinating to watch, and I try to be aware of the American made stuff that is about disabled people, and I think there's far more disabled stories, because there's a lot of coding, that happens. But, even watching stuff like The Shape of Water, which I know Sally Hawkins is not a deaf, performer, but there are little things that movie does that just feel relatable, even though it's not, like looking at sexual harassment and the way that, disabled women are disproportionately sexually harassed. I think is really fascinating. Now we just need to take the next step, which is actually like making sure we're casting authentically and allowing disabled people to tell those stories. If Guillermo del Toro wants to make disabled stories, great. Like, get some disabled screenwriters. There's still progress that definitely needs to be made, but it's interesting to see how certain stories do still resonate, even though, they may be problematic.
And finally, let's talk about cooking. You've become kitchen kind of well, you like cooking. You only fairly recently, I think you said up until you were 27, you had never really cooked anything.
Yeah, I mean, it's when you live, in a house, most houses are not built for disabled people. I think there's still this falsehood that like disabled people get houses at some point in their life. They're just like gifted them. We are not. So yeah, my house was not designed to be accessible. And I didn't really cook. My mom was my primary person that was like would make stuff, and then she went into the hospital for something a couple years ago, and I was like, shit, I should probably figure out life stuff at some point, and now now that we live in a different place, there's a bit more access because our apartment is smaller, if anything, so that helps.
Was it an interesting week wherein suddenly you suddenly you're like a strange little version of what's the show where everyone's on a deserted island? Survivor.
It was definitely a challenge to figure out, like, most people joke that their kitchen is out to kill them, but if you're disabled, your kitchen is definitely out to kill you, because
the countertop can't possibly work for you.
Countertops are not high. the stove is just high, too high for me. So like, if you're trying to like stir anything in a pot, your hand is like, your arm is like right near the burner.
How do you do that? Now you've been able to accommodate yourself and the kitchen. You figured out a lot of ways to work in the
I use
kitchen.
the oven a lot. Anything I can bake is probably easier because at least the oven and me are the same height. So I can like, come in around the side and put stuff in. I have an electric skillet, that I can cook stuff on, but it requires a lot of innovation. I cook a lot of things on the floor, which is really a lot easier. You don't got to worry about like having your table get singed by an electric skillet.
Yeah.
So it requires a lot of adaptation.
I envision a cooking show with you.
I mean, I tell my mom all the time, we really do need a cooking show. It
would be amazing. No one's doing that. No one's done that. It would be me
talking about accessibility and then her and I yelling at each other about how to do stuff, because my mom and I have very different methods of cooking. So it would be both relatable and accessible.
Where should we send the contracts?
Exactly. I'm ready. I'm ready to do this. Take my next step into cookery.
I cannot thank you enough for spending this time with us. The conversation, first of all, it was as wonderful as I expected it to be. And second, it was as short as I thought it was going to feel, which is exactly because we've been talking for an hour, and man, I bet we could go on and on for days.
Anytime. I have very little social life, so I'm always around.
Well, we can certainly shoot the shit about movies. There's some movies I want to suggest to you, because if you haven't seen them, first, Don't Look Now. If you haven't seen Don't Look Now, I would love to have a conversation with you about Don't Look Now.
I am very fascinated with that movie. And again, from a disability perspective, it's very interesting. So, yeah.
So, at the very least, we owe ourselves a conversation about Don't Look Now.
Yes.
All right. Yes. Well, there you go. There's the sequel for you. Thank you, Kristen, and thank you, everyone, and we will see you next time. The How Not to Make a Movie podcast is executive produced by me, Alan Katz, by Gil Adler, and by Jason Stein. Our artwork was done by the amazing Jody Webster, and Jason Jody, along with Mando, are all the hosts of the fun and informative Dads from the Crypt podcast. Follow them for what my old pal the Crypt Keeper would have called terrific Crypt content.